Hello there folks, I'm Dan Brown from Sort of Interesting, and today you are literally joining me on top of good old narrowboat Abel's Ark. We've got the fire lit inside and it's 26 degrees in there. Meanwhile, it's about 3 degrees outside, so let's talk about the onset of winter and how quickly autumn seems to be getting very, very cold out here on the canals of Shropshire and Wales. And well, let's just get inside in the warm. So my friends, now that we're nice and toasty on board and I'm stood right next to a fireplace that is sending out a tremendous amount of heat towards me, I want to start by building a classic romantic image of boat life during the tail end of the year and the darker, colder months afloat, and then absolutely destroy that romantic image in the second part of this video. So, without further ado my friends, you might be seeing some images that I've taken from the canal over the last week or two, with the incredible blue skies, the amazing changes of the trees going from their summer greenery through the classic golden brown of autumn to eventually become just spindly naked branches that sometimes on the cold winter nights when I'm walking up the towpath to the boat, shining the torch around, almost look a little bit sinister, like bony fingers casting these massive shadows across everything in the distance. And it can be a truly beautiful time, as you can imagine, with the leaves coming off and the crisp frosty mornings and things freezing up and getting ice and frost, giving everything a nice little white covering before any actual snow turns up to really send things into romantic overdrive. But not only that, sometimes when you're on board and I'm in bed just down the corridor in the background there, and I can see the flames of the fire reflecting the orange dancing light on the back wall as it shines through from the glass of the fire door, and you've got not only the crackling of the wood in the fire, but the pitter-patter of the rain on top of the roof. It can be one of the cosiest and warmest and most beautiful, beautiful experiences I can possibly imagine or ever romantically describe to you in this manner. And you can imagine that that's a truly, truly fulfilling, heartwarming and satisfying way to live. So, this talk of these idyllic boat life moments during the winter, well, it's completely factual and true based on my genuine experience, to be honest. And the real kicker is not in the fact that these won't happen, but the fact that statistically the weather in the UK is very wet very often. And as much as these beautiful frosty mornings and stuff can happen and do happen, and I've seen many, many of them over my time on boats, the reality is, even just the footage you're seeing with these blue skies in this video from the last 2 weeks or so, those are the absolute minority of days, and it's been very wet recently already here in the early part of autumn before we get to the proper wet months. And we've got flooding throughout the UK once again. We've got the water table really high because even going back over the last couple of months, there's been that much rain happening just every so often to keep it topped up that the ground's already saturated in many places. So as we head into the true wet winter months, goodness knows what the flooding could be like when we get to December, January, and well, we'll just have to wait and see. However, I think that just how long the cold, wet winter weather can be prolonged can be illustrated by this clip that I took in early November. So this is from the last week or so, and well, get ready for very early winter weather coming in. Okay, my friends, so my intention was today to be on the boat by the late afternoon. However, while I've been milling around at my nan and granddad's house and visiting family, as you may be able to tell, a little bit of snow has come down. And, well, as a new driver, it doesn't fill me with joy, but certainly going off to the middle of nowhere. And, well, I was planning on moving the boat later on today before it got dark, to be honest. So there's a few things to contemplate with that footage. And I think, firstly, the idea that I can get caught out while I'm visiting friends and family and getting supplies by snow in early November shows just how far and how long the proper winter weather can drag out for in the UK. If you consider the heaviest snowfall I've ever experienced on a boat was during March, you don't want that November to March period being potentially peppered with this sort of real winter weather. And I'll admit, I've only been driving a couple of months and I was scared to drive in those conditions, especially considering some of the off the beaten track rural places I like to moor the boat. So we'll see how that goes in the future. In all seriousness, that snow didn't last long, and by the evening it was pretty much all entirely gone. But only because it had absolutely poured down. So again, not only had we had more rain and more water going into the waterlogged ground, but we'd had the melting snow adding to that at the same time. And there's actually been a road repeatedly closed on the outskirts of Oswestry, where I was born and raised, over the last couple of weeks, which is a rarity really, but because the water table is just that high, well, there's just nowhere else for it to go when it starts raining. So my friends, let's enjoy a little bit more boaty footage and raise our spirits after all this talk of rain and snow. So this is my old winter mooring place from many years ago, and well, they've put this new proper path surface down, as back in my day, my friends, it used to be entirely mud along this section, so that's pleasant to see. Although further downstream it returns to the muddy towpath that I used to know and, well, not love. But in all seriousness, there are a few other elements that the weather throws in during these months. And that's firstly, obviously, you want to make sure that you've got plenty of supplies and stuff to go in the fire, as illustrated by this smoking chimney. Although this is actually smokeless fuel, just a random fact here. There's always like some weird layer that evaporates off the coal stuff that I put in the fire before it then goes smokeless. So let's move from that clip, because I don't want to inhale too much of whatever that stuff is. This clip is meant to illustrate what the cooler temperatures of this time of year cause as one of the major issues on board, I suppose, and that is this condensation. As soon as you start cooking or boiling a kettle, you'll find that a lot of condensation can very quickly build up on the windows, and you even saw there how the window closest to the dry heat of the fire didn't have any condensation on it, and yet the window further away and further down in the boat away from the fire did. So that's just something that you've always got to think about, and you don't want to get too bad, and make sure, well, again, that you just keep the fire roaring just to discourage anything mould related maybe turning up. But this is another clip that illustrates something, and that's the fact that here, this is only about 5 o'clock in the evening, in early to mid-November, and yet you can see it's pitch black. So that's going to have an impact depending on how you keep your batteries charged up. Firstly, if you've got solar panels, it might start to drain your batteries a little bit quicker because you haven't got the sunlight hours that you have in midsummer to charge them up during the daytime. And of course, if it's getting dark earlier, you're using those batteries for a lot more time to power the lights and stuff like that. And so there's all sorts of little things like that that you've just got to take into account and think about. So the weather is obviously one of the biggest factors of boat life during this time of the year. And that's not just because of the obvious things of, oh, every time you go out you're getting wet and cold, or, oh, there's more energy being used because it's darker for longer, so you've got to light the boat and so on. Or even things like, oh, it's cold, so we're going to use more fuel in the fire. As I often say, there's different parts of the canal that are more likely to freeze up than others. Luckily it doesn't freeze up around here, yet I still always keep plenty of supplies on board, not just of things like coal and stuff to go in the fire, but random household items like bottled water and simple tinned food and packets of food that are long life, because even though I know the boat's unlikely to get stuck in ice up here on the Llangollen, there's every chance that there could be a tree come down across the canal as the weather gets a little bit wilder. And I've seen many, many trees over the canal over the years, and sometimes not even in particularly bad weather. They just give up the ghost and fall across the canal sometimes as all the soil is steadily eroded away over decades and decades. And of course, you don't want to end up in these terrible weather conditions finding yourself, oh, flipping heck, there's a tree down here, we're going to have to wait a few days. Well, we while it gets cleared out and so on, and then having to, like you say, drag heavy items in your backpack up a muddy towpath and stuff like that. So there's lots of different things and different reasons why the weather can impact boat life over this time of the year. So my friends, I hope I haven't come across as too negative in this video, as that wasn't my intention. It was meant to be just a reality check, and as I say, the weather really is the biggest factor in a lot of boat life. If you're out cruising all over the place in particular, then you, well, get very, very well acquainted with the nuances of the different seasons. And as much as there are these beautiful stereotypical moments of the brilliant boat life serenity, the natural way of life amongst nature, there's also an awful lot of the, oh yes, nature is very often a very wet, cold place to be amongst. And realistically, like you say, that's not meant to try and put people off. It's meant to just be the reality check of, well, you know what, boat life, it's beautiful a lot of the time, and through the summer months and the spring and even a lot of the winter, it can be fantastic. But if you could have been on board with me on Narrowboat Tilly during the 2015 to 16 winter, which was the last winter I had on board that boat, then you would have seen literally at one point an entire month go past without a single truly dry day. And you can imagine just how much trouble that caused, not only for me biking everywhere back then, but also for just general people trying to go about their business when there was bridges collapsing in the UK and all. It was a turbulent time in some parts of the country. And so that's why I always say I've been incredibly lucky and incredibly grateful to have my boat in a part of the world that rarely sees any flooding. However, I feel like I'm jinxing things now by saying stuff like that, so I'm going to stop talking, say thank you very much for tuning in. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope there's been something to take away from it other than, oh yeah, it rains in winter. And well, check the links in the description. Please do consider checking out my short boat life books if you want to help me out and support this channel. And well, until the next time, my friends, have an absolutely fantastic day. Keep it interesting. Keep it boat worthy. Sorry, I didn't realise what angle I was facing then. I thought the boat was in the background there. Keep it boat worthy, keep it interesting, have an absolutely fantastic day, and of course, my friends, farewell.